Let's start with our motivation. And thinking how our lives depend on the lives of so many other living beings. Our food comes from their efforts. So do our clothes, shelter, enjoyments, education. Everything we have came due to the efforts of other living beings. And so we've been the recipient of their kindness since before we were even born. So it's important that we actually feel that we are the recipients of kindness, not just that we intellectually say this, but that we let it into our own hearts and minds that this is the actual situation. And so if we've been the recipient of kindness since before we were even born, then getting angry seems really inappropriate. And being demanding to have our own way also seems inappropriate. But what does make sense is to try and repay that kindness or pay it forward by extending our kindness into the universe to each and every living being. So imagine for a moment, if you would, what that might feel like to have that attitude of kindness that you radiate just by who you are to whoever you happen to encounter. And imagine how you would feel being that way in the world and how the people you encounter would feel encountering you that way. So if we want to be able to benefit others in that way, we need to have that compassionate intention spontaneously in our mind, not so that it comes and goes and comes and goes. So that requires practice. It requires wisdom. And it requires familiarity. So with that spiritual goal in mind, then let's embark on the path to get there. With that intention to be of great benefit, temporally and ultimately to all living beings, especially by showing them the path to full awakening. So on Thursday nights, we usually have a series of classes, and it just happens right now that we're between two texts. And so rather than start a new text this week, since we have an adult week, I'm just going to give a talk kind of designed for all of you that I don't think it would hurt the other people to hear either. Okay? So when we were talking a couple of days ago, the topic of rebirth and karma came up. And how do you understand rebirth? How can you prove it? Or, on one basis do you believe in rebirth? So I said that it can be proved by reasoning, and people's eyebrows went up like, what? So just listen to this and tell me if it makes some kind of sense. So let's start out with just causality, okay? Things that exist and that change, that come into being and then go out of being, and change in the middle. All these things depend on causes, right? Nothing can come into existence without a cause. That we know that from science, we know that from our daily life, because we organize our daily life around cause and effect. Why do you go to school? To get an education. It isn't because you want to go water skiing. That's not the effect of going to school, okay? The effect that you want is so that you gain some knowledge, so that you can go to work and you can support yourself and so on, okay? So we do certain things in our lives because, cause and effect works. And we know that if you create the cause and if you get all the surrounding circumstances, then the effect will come. So we look at the first moment of life, in this particular life. So does it sound reasonable to you to say that what life is, it's a coming together of the physical side of our being and the mental side of our being? Because a person has a body and then a person has a mind. By mind, I mean like the cognitive, experiential part of us. Okay? So we can see when we're alive, there's the physical aspect, and then there's the mental aspect that cognizes, experiences emotions, makes decisions, and things like that. Without the mind, if you only have the body, that's called a corpse. Okay? So there's a difference between a corpse and a living being, isn't there? What makes that difference? The presence or absence of the mind. Okay? Are you with me? Makes sense so far? Okay. Now, you have the mind and the body. They're two different natures, okay? The body is something physical. It's made out of atoms and molecules. And scientists have developed instruments that can be used to examine different aspects of our body, or different aspects of the physical universe outside of us as well. Okay, so those are the scientific tools, and, microscopes, testing galvanic skin response, examining even the subtle happenings in the synapses of our nervous system, and so on. Okay, so that's all on the physical side. The mind, on the other hand, is not made of matter. The mind the definition of mind is clear and cognizant. So clear means that it's not made of matter. It also means that it's clear in the sense our mind can reflect objects. And then the second quality of the mind, cognizance, means that it can know or engage in objects. Yeah? So we can experience things, right? So when we're alive, we say we're alive because the body and the mind have some relationship with each other. When they cease to have that relationship, that's what we call death. Yeah. After death, then the body has its own continuum. We bury it or cremate it, and the atoms and molecules of this body just scatter, and what do they say, from dirt into dirt or something like that? Yeah, from dust into dust. Yeah, it just, it gets recycled. The body gets recycled physically in nature. The mind, however, is not made of atoms and molecules. So you can't say that it gets recycled physically because it doesn't have a physical existence. But it has its own continuum. It doesn't cease. Okay? So this clear and cognizant ability of the mind, there's nothing that can make it cease. Mm-hmm. It's just clarity and cognizance. And that continues. Yeah? When it's in the body, then it's very wrapped up with our sense faculties, with our brain. All those things are interrelated and affect each other. But at the time of death, like I said, the body has its continuum, the mind has its continuum. Now, what is the continuum of the mind? Well, even when we're alive, we look at, our mind when we're alive in this life, even when the mind is related to the body, okay? From one moment to the next moment of mind, what is it that produces a moment of mind? So for right now, at this moment, yeah, you have clarity and cognizance, right? You have a mind that is clear and cognizant. What was the thing that turned into that moment of mind? Yeah, the previous moment of mind. Okay? So one moment of mind comes from a previous moment of mind. Yeah. Similar to one moment of our body came from the previous moment of our body. Yeah, your body of today is dependent on your body from yesterday, isn't it? It didn't come out of nowhere just today. Yeah, your body of yesterday was a cause for your body of today. In a similar way, the clear and cognizant nature of the mind of yesterday is, what we call the substantial cause, the cause that turns into the clear and cognizant nature of the mind today. Okay? So at the time of death, one moment of material produces the next moment of material, and the body gets recycled. With the mind, one moment of clarity and cognizance produces the next moment of clarity and cognizance. Okay? And we say that goes on into the future life. In a similar way, if we look at the moment of conception, when the fertilized egg and the mind came into contact and joined to become a living being, yeah, where did the body, that fertilized egg, come from? Where did the material side of us come from? Yeah, it came from the sperm and egg of our parents, which came from their genes, and it also came from all the food they ate. Okay? So it has a whole series of material causes before it. Similarly, with the mind, it didn't just appear at the moment of conception without a cause, because nothing can happen without causes. So it needed to have a cause. And we can see in our life that one moment of mind is produced by the previous moment. So in the same way, at the time of conception, that moment of consciousness or mind was produced by the previous moment of consciousness. That previous moment of consciousness was not attached to this body, so it was not of this life. So in that way, we can start tracing back previous moments of consciousness into a previous life. Just as we can trace back, the previous moments of the material that forms our body, we can trace that back too, can't we? And it goes back infinitely, maybe to the Big Bang. But even before the Big Bang, you had to have something, because the Big Bang couldn't happen before without a cause. So even the physicality of our body, had infinite, regression of causes, there being no beginning. Yeah. In the same way, the mind, that which is clear and cognizant, had an infinite series of mind moments going back, so that there was no beginning of that either. Yeah. Because we may say, well, it needs to have a beginning. We may say either our body needs, the material of our body needs to have a beginning, or our mind needs to have a beginning. And when people ask that, I say, why? Why do we need to have an ultimate beginning to something? Who said there needed to be a beginning before which nothing existed? Yeah. If you remember in math class when you have the number line? Yeah. So let's say we're standing in the middle right now. You go on this side, -1, -2, -3, -4, minus 5,000,000, 5,000, minus 10 gazillion, yeah. It goes back. Can you ever find a beginning to the number line going in the negative numbers? No. When you go forward, 1, 2, going forward, can you ever find an end to the number line? Is there a highest number beyond which you cannot add 1? You can always add 1, can't you? Can always add 1. You can't say there's an end in this direction. You can't say there's an end in this direction. So somebody may say, but there's got to be an end to the number line. And you can say, that's fine. You can believe that there is, but just try and find it. Yeah? And you let them see if they can find it. So in the same way, when we look, the continuation of matter or energy goes back infinitely, goes forward infinitely. It changes, of course. What the Big Bang looked like and what everything looks like now is different, but the nature of that stuff is the same. It doesn't just cease altogether. And so it is also with our mind. Yeah, there's the clarity of the continuum of clarity and cognizance, one moment following the next moment. Yeah, if there were something that could obliterate one moment of clarity and cognizance producing the next, then you could say there was an end to the mental continuum. But you can't posit anything that can stop that continuum. What are you going to say stops the continuum of clarity and cognizance from one moment to the next? Yeah, even you have an atom bomb, that's going to destroy, the continuum of the world as we know it. It won't destroy all matter. The matter will change forms. But that atomic bomb won't destroy the continuum of clarity and cognizance, because the bomb can only affect material matter. It can't stop the continuity of something that doesn't have matter. Okay? So it's in this way that we can, through using some kind of reasoning, show that there were past and future lives, that the mind existed prior to this birth and will continue to exist after this birth. Or after this life, we should say. Okay? Yeah. So that's one way to get some kind of feeling about the possibility of rebirth. Yeah, is to really think about that reasoning and see if it makes sense to you. And if you're not so certain about it, see if you can find some fault in it that would disprove it. Okay? Then, in addition to that, it can be helpful, to hear stories about people who do have recollections from their previous lives. Some of you may have seen the movie Kundun. Yeah? And so you remember that the Dalai Lama was able to, what was it, his dentures or something from a previous life? Yeah, able to recognize that. But as I've heard this story, in ancient Tibet, they didn't have hotels and motels. Yeah, you just traveled on your yak, and when you wanted to stop at night, you found a farmhouse, and people would always let you stay there. It was very open like that. People were very trusting. So after the 13th Dalai Lama passed away, there were a number, the Tibetans have this thing of, how to look for where the next Dalai Lama will be born. In other words, the continuity of consciousness of the 13th Dalai Lama, where the 14th Dalai Lama is going to be born. So they have one lake that they go to, and they do a lot of pujas and meditation and stuff. And then they can see letters and different things in the lake. And so they had seen certain letters, they had seen what a farmhouse looks like and all. And the lamas who did that had written all of this down. Then also the body of the 13th Dalai Lama was sitting in state, and some kind of fungus or something grew in the room on the northwest side of the northwest pillar. So they took that as a sign to look in the northwest for the next Dalai Lama. Now, of course, if you have a search party going out to try and look for little boys, they never look for little girls so far. You're not going to go out and say, we're looking for the next Dalai Lama, because everybody and their uncle is going to bring out their kid and say, it's my kid. Okay, because my kid is special. You should see what my kid is the most special one. So they don't announce it. Yeah. What they do is they dress up. They pretend to be a party of merchants. Okay? So the monks who were in charge of looking for the next Dalai Lama, in this party of merchants, they dressed up and they acted like the people who took care of the animals. Because, when you came to a farmhouse, the merchants, who were the important people, they would go into the meditation room, like the living room, because they were the important one. You put them in that room. The people who handled the animals, they were not so important. They used to hang out in the kitchen. Well, who else is in the kitchen? The little kids. Okay? So this one Lama, a few of them were in there, in the kitchen, in one house that was in, the Amdo area. They had seen an Ah letter in the lake when they looked, and so on. So it fit those kind of descriptions, what they had seen in the lake. And they're sitting there with this little kid, and the little kid comes up to one Lama and sits in his lap. And I'm trying to remember this Lama's name. I met him. I actually met his Rebirth, actually. Oh, it starts with a K. I can't remember. Anyway, this kid sits on his lap, and says, "Oh, you're Lama so-and-so," and said his name. He's dressed up as a guy who takes care of animals. The kid didn't know his name. So, and then this Lama was wearing the mala, the prayer beads from the previous Dalai Lama, and the child pulls on these prayer beads and says, "These are mine. These are mine, give them to me." So, they did a whole bunch of other tests, seeing if the child could identify other objects. And he could. And so after a while of doing these texts, then they said, okay, this is the incarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. So they identified him. He was 3 or 4 years old. We had the picture downstairs in the foyer, in the entry room. And this one too. You can see he was very little. But he was able to identify these kinds of things. Apparently he could also speak, when he started speaking, in Lhasa dialect, which in Amdo they don't speak at all. It's a totally different dialect. So there were all these things, that gave some indication. And if you know the Dalai Lama in this life, he's quite an incredible being. It would be really a stretch to say that he was not the rebirth of somebody extraordinary, because the present one is quite extraordinary. Although he says, "I'm just a simple Buddhist monk," which is what makes him so extraordinary. There's lots of people who say, "Oh, I've realized this and that, and I'm special and almost enlightened or fully enlightened, and you can make your donations here." There's lots of people who do that. But somebody who says, "I'm just a simple Buddhist monk, nothing more," even though he has a societal position like that, those people are rare. Okay, so that's just one kind of example. His Holiness also talks about a little girl in India. This was some years ago. And she was maybe 4 years old, in just a regular family in a poor village. And she started talking about her family who was in another village, another nearby village. And said, I want to go see my family there. I want to go there. And started talking about who she was in a previous life. And her parents took her to that village. And she was able to identify her parents from the previous life. Yeah, she was really little at the time that this happened. Yeah. So they say that often when kids are really little, they may say some really extraordinary things, but their parents usually say, oh, you were just dreaming, or, something like that. They discount it. And then, of course, everything that's going on in this life becomes, very strong. And so the kids stop remembering and they stop talking about things like that. Yeah. There was also another video. Do we have a copy of that here? Huh? Yeah, the one about the doctor. Yeah? So that might be an interesting thing for... it's a video. There's some researchers in Australia investigating this. And the film has, I think, 4 different cases. But the one with the doctor was the one, for me, that was very impressive. So they hypnotized people. So this one woman under hypnosis in Australia, who had never been out of Australia, remembered, being a Dr. James Burns in Scotland, in the 16th century or, several centuries ago. And she gave this whole account when she was under hypnosis, which they wrote up. And then the researchers took her to Scotland. And when they got off do you remember the name of the city? What's the main? Edinburgh, right. They got off there. They had blindfolded her when they were coming into Edinburgh. Then they took off the blindfold and said, okay, find your way to the medical college. And she did. And then they took her around the medical college, and she was noticing all these different things. And then at a certain point, she said, no, it wasn't like this before. The corridor wasn't this way, or the room wasn't this way. Something wasn't the same. And she was quite certain about that. They went in the old archives of the library down in the basement and pulled out an old floor plan. And sure enough, it was the way she had described it before it had been remodeled. Quite amazing. Yeah? So you can hear these kinds of stories, and that might give you some feel like, yeah, maybe it's possible. When I was teaching in Florida many years ago, I was teaching at a public library, and Florida, was near a retirement community, so all these elderly people came. They had asked me to give a talk on rebirth, of all things, to a bunch of older people who are not Buddhists, who probably don't believe in rebirth. Anyway, I gave the talk. So afterwards, one woman comes up to me, and she says, wow, what you said really helps me to understand my son, because nobody in our family is musical. But my son, from the time he was a very small child, was very musically inclined. And when we would go places, if they were playing classical music, he could identify, oh, this is Beethoven's symphony number blah blah, and this is, Bach wrote na. And she said, I could never understand how this kid knew these things and where he got this inclination towards music. But if there's rebirth, then that really makes sense, and I can understand that about my child. I thought that was fascinating. Just some lady, in a retirement community in Florida, who had never thought about rebirth before, said that. Okay, so you hear things like that, and it makes a difference. In the same way, we could ask, why are any of us interested in Buddhism? Yeah, most of us here did not grow up in a Buddhist family. Yeah, so if you look in terms of genes, no Buddhists genetically. Yeah, my parents used to remind me of that all the time. Yeah. There are no Buddhists in your family lineage. Okay, Mom. Okay. Nurture. Okay, that's the nature part. Nurture part. When you were growing up, did you have much contact with Buddhism? Yeah, I didn't. I maybe saw a picture in, a social studies book of a Buddha. I can't even remember. I'm just thinking I must have at some period. So why are we interested in Buddhism? There's nothing genetically. There's almost nothing, in terms of nature, in terms of our backgrounds. Why? Yeah. I mean, look at all these people, the Sangha. Did any of your parents raise you to grow up to be a Buddhist monastic? No. Why? Why? Where did this interest come from? So there's nothing in this life really that can explain it. If you think of previous lives, okay, there must have been some kind of familiarity or something in a previous life that made that connection, that, so that this lifetime, when we encountered the Buddha's teachings, something said, oh, wow, that makes sense. So, just in terms of our own experience, sometimes explaining why we are the way we are. Yeah. This afternoon, we talked a little bit about our families and how our families often raised us with a certain image of what they wanted us to be. Yeah, and we didn't turn out that way. Why? We have our parents' genes. They were a principal influence in our life. And yet, we turned out very differently. So this is where we start talking about karma. Okay? The actions that we did in previous lives that put potentials or seeds, we can call them karmic seeds, on our mind stream. Yeah? different things we were in contact with, that we were familiar with, different thoughts that we cultivated, different actions that we did repeatedly. Yeah. So these kinds of things leave, I don't like this word, but for lack of anything else, an energy trace. Yeah, it leaves some kind, what we do in life doesn't just vanish and have no result. It leaves some kind of trace, a karmic seed, something similar to that, when you meet the proper conditions later on, then it ripens and it influences what we become, who we're reborn as, what we experience, habitual attitudes that we may have, what kind of environment we live in. So, all of those kind of details about, what exactly we're born as, they come due to the actions in our previous life. And not just in the lifetime immediately before this, because remember, we have infinite beginningless lifetimes. Yeah. So there's many, many karmic seeds, on our mental continuum. And then different ones, of actions that we did in many, many different lifetimes. Different ones are ripening in this lifetime. Every day we have karmic seeds ripening, influencing what we experience. Okay? And so these kinds of seeds can come from different lifetimes in the past and different kinds of actions that we've done in the past. Okay? So when we talk about karma, there's some basic principles, I guess you could say, about how karma functions. Yeah. And one is that happiness is always the result of virtuous actions, and these actions can be physical, verbal, mental, done by our body, speech, and mind. And unhappiness is always the result of harmful actions, negative or destructive actions. Okay? So there's a correspondence between the kind of action we do and the kind of result we experience. Okay? If we give a physical example, daisies grow from daisy seeds. Okay? And cabbage grows from cabbage seeds. If you plant cabbage seeds, you're not going to get daisies. And if you plant daisy seeds, you're not going to get cabbages and you're not going to get chili. Okay? So there's some concordance between the cause and the result. So in Buddhism, how did we come to even have the labels constructive and destructive actions? Those actions received those labels depending upon the results that they brought. So the Buddha, because his mind was completely free of obstructions and obscurations, could see all existence. And when he saw sentient beings experience happiness, he was able to see what are the actions that were the cause of this happiness. All the actions that cause pleasure or happiness got the name virtuous, constructive, wholesome karma. Karma just means action. When he saw sentient beings suffering and traced back the causative actions, those were called negative or destructive actions. Okay? So from a Buddhist perspective, our actions are virtuous, non-virtuous, constructive, destructive, in dependence upon the kind of result they bring. Okay. In theistic religions, actions become negative because God said so. Yeah, God made up the rules, and God said, don't do this and do this. In Buddhism, it's not like that. Buddha didn't create anything, even the path to enlightenment. He only described how things function. Okay, so things are called positive or negative actions in dependence on the results that they bring. Mm-hmm. A very different kind of way of looking at things. Yeah. So the system of karma is just a natural system of cause and effect. Buddha didn't make it up. Buddha didn't invent it. Yeah, it's like Newton. Newton didn't discover. He discovered gravity, but he didn't create it. Okay, so like that. So that's one trait about our karma, Negativity produces unhappiness. Yeah, constructive actions produce happiness. A second quality is that small actions can bring big results. Yeah, just in the same way, you look outside at these really enormous trees, and they all started from a seed that was like this big. Sometimes I look at those trees and I think, my goodness, how did something that huge grow from something this big? It's amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? Yeah. So we can do a small action and it can have a big result. So what that means is when we have the opportunity to do something that is constructive, even if it's small, do it. And if there's the possibility of doing an action that is non-virtuous, even a small one, better not. Okay. You may have seen some of the nuns going out and spraying in the fields. We have knapweed, this invasive weed in our fields. Yeah. One little flower pod has 900 seeds in it. Yeah. So if you can take out so much knapweed, but even one little pod left behind, yeah, it can produce a whole bunch of knapweed plants. Maybe not 900 next year, maybe just a few. But then those will produce some more and produce some more and produce some more. Yeah. So my mother had an expression of nipping things in the bud. Yeah? Like catch it when it's small. So this pertains to it. Okay? So even little white lies, better not. Yeah? Even small acts of kindness, better do. Okay, then the third quality of karma is that if you don't create the cause, you don't experience the result. Yeah. So we only experience the results of actions that we've done. Yeah, the karmic actions that we've done. We don't experience the result of karmic actions other people have done. And if we don't create the cause for something, that event won't happen. So in terms of attaining awakening, if we just pray, Buddha, 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 please may I become awakened, ASAP, Yeah. And you pray from the depths of your heart, Buddha, 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 please, may I develop wisdom, may I develop compassion. But aside from praying, you don't do anything. You don't study the method for how to develop compassion. You don't meditate on compassion. You don't practice it in your daily life. You don't study the texts that talk about wisdom. You don't think about those. You don't meditate those. If you don't create all those other causes, just praying is not going to get you to awakening. Yeah? Because if you don't create the cause, you don't get the result. Okay? Praying helps. It steers our energy in a good direction. But if we don't create the basic causes for training our mind in awakened qualities, we're not going to get to awakening. Okay? You might have remembered during 9/11, when the World Trade Center buildings went kaboom, there were people who normally did not go to those buildings, but that particular day they went. Although normally, they didn't work there, they never went there. It's just that particular day they happened to go. Then there were other people who worked there every single day, but that day they didn't go to work. There's a story of one guy who walked his daughter to school that day. It was her first day of school, so he didn't go to work. Then you have that thing that happens that day. And some people who you would think would be in the building are not in the building, experiencing the result of the attack. And other people who you wouldn't expect to be there are there and experience the result. So we say this is because people had created different karma in the past. And if we had created the karma to be there when it happened, then you're there. If you don't create the karma, then that day you walk your child to their first day of kindergarten instead of being at work. Yeah? So there's all these kinds of strange things that, if you think about it, if we don't create the cause, we don't experience the result. Then the fourth quality about karma is that the actions that we create leave these seeds in our mind, and they don't vanish. They don't just kind of get lost. Yeah, they're not like, what do you lose all the time? Yeah, that you can, we all have things that we lose, not just misplace, but actually lose. Yeah, and they don't get lost like that. Yeah. And it's not like your computer files. Yeah. Have you had, I don't know about you, but I've had computer files simply disappear. I had a problem a few months ago with my cloud, storing things in the cloud. If I double click to open a file in the cloud, it would vanish from the computer. Even the title would vanish. Okay? Unfortunately, my negative karma doesn't vanish like that. I wish it did, But our karma doesn't get lost in that way. Now, that doesn't mean that our karma is cast in concrete, and after we, do something that we later regret, it doesn't mean that there's no methods to amend it or to purify it. We can purify in the case of negative karma. Yeah, there's a whole process. It's called the four opponent powers that we practice, and that can counteract the effects of the negative karmas that we've done. You know, if it doesn't remove it completely, it can at least make the result that would have been very strong a little bit weaker, or a result that would have lasted for a long time, it ripens in, it lasts only for a short time. So depending on what we do now, we can purify these actions so that they don't ripen in that way. Yeah. So that's how how we can change the destructive karma. But even the constructive karmic seeds, if we generate very strong, cynical, wrong views, or we get very, very angry, that can impede the ripening of our constructive karma. So that something that was going to ripen soon, now will ripen later, or something that was going to bring a lot of happiness, now just brings a little bit, these kinds of things. So we have to be careful about our anger and our wrong views, because they can really create havoc in that way. On the other hand, when we do things that we don't feel good about, there is a way to make amends, and purify the actions and start afresh. Okay? That's a little bit about karma too. So how about if we pause here and you can ask some questions?
I've got a few comments online.
Okay.
When you die, how does your karma go with you to the next life? Is it together somewhere waiting for you in your next rebirth, but then there isn't an I?
Yeah. Okay. So the karmic seeds also are formless. They aren't consciousness, but they aren't made of material. Okay? But they have an association with the mind stream, and they have an association with what we call the mere I. Okay? So while we say that there is no inherently existent I, we do say that there is a mere I that exists by being designated, merely designated. Okay? And so that I carries the karma from one lifetime to the next lifetime. Yeah? Who we are in this lifetime isn't exactly the same person as we will be in our next lifetime, but there's a continuity between them. In the same way that who we were yesterday and who we are today are not exactly the same person, but there's a continuity between yesterday and today. Okay? So that mere I is what can carry the karmic seeds from one lifetime to the next.
Another person asked, did the teachings say anything about a possible time lag between the existence of mind in one life and the existence of mind in the next life? That is, does the mind take up residence in a new life immediately after the end of the previous one, or can the continuity of mind exist without a body, material or otherwise?
Oh yeah, the continuity of consciousness can exist without a body. Usually we would enter what we call the intermediate or bardo state, where you have a subtle kind of body, and then within the next 7 weeks, then you get reborn into the realm that you're going to be reborn in the case of if you're going to be born with a gross body.
On a particular experience on psilocybin mushrooms, I just got a very real intuition of, I say it's real, but it's, it's just kind of my experience as much as I could designate it. And it just came across in that way that I'm like, wow, this was the first time I ever even considered it being a thing. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because I know it's often not part of the traditional Buddhist path.
And I don't know if the Tibetan shamans used drugs or
Datura.
not. Yeah, I don't remember hearing any things like that. Does anybody else? So, so when I first met the Dharma, 1975, I met it in the U.S. Then I went to Nepal. I had been in Nepal before. I went back, and there I went to Kopan Monastery. It's up on a hill. And together with, they had these courses there for Westerners. And in Kathmandu in those days, there was one street called Freak Street. You could go there and get any kind of drug you wanted on Freak Street, because there were all the, disillusioned hippies traveling across Asia. And, you got to, where did you go when you got to Kathmandu? You went to Freak Street, and then so you'd get some drugs and eat a little bit of chocolate cake, and then you would find a monastery, because that's what you did, is, you want to go to a cool monastery having some special thing. So we would walk up the hill to Kopan, and Lama Yeshe and Rinpoche, are teaching us a class. And, half the people in the course are like, "Hi, Lama, we have some extra dope. Do you want some?" And, and would ask him. And they'd ask this question of, well, what about taking drugs when, and then meditating? Wouldn't that open your mind up more? Yeah, because many people, had experiences like yours where your mind opens up in things that you had never really considered before. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, this makes sense. So people were asking Lama about taking drugs and meditating. And Lama's response to us was always, "You're already hallucinating, dear. You don't need drugs." Yeah, because the way we see things, what is considered our normal sense perceptions, our normal mental cognitions, from a Buddhist perspective, are all mistaken, like hallucinations. Yeah. So he never advocated taking drugs, because he said, actually, what you want to do is stop hallucinating. So, but this, you had that experience, and it's clearly a meaningful experience to you. And that's fine. Yeah. But it's, if you want to really, from, now get into following the path, then it's really important to keep your mind quite clear so that you can do the meditations properly. Yeah, because our mind already is very creative. Yeah, and I mean, I know for myself, I can close my eyes and I can start seeing faces. Yeah, lots of faces. Now, I could either get really interested in all these faces, and who are they, and what are they making up, and where are they coming from, and did I know them, and will I meet them? But basically, it's all just stuff running through my mind that is not in any way going to help me develop wisdom and compassion. So it might be entertaining, but it doesn't lead me where I want to go. So I don't pay any attention to that. Yeah. when I first was exploring Buddhism, I tried going to some other groups of different things, and I went to it must have been some kind of church. I think maybe they talked in tongues and people fell backwards and, had these kind of experiences and stuff. So I went there and, everybody's having this stuff and I'm just watching, nothing. But, there was the seed planted in my mind. And when I went home and I started meditating the next day, all of a sudden I started feeling like I was going to go backwards. Now I realized that was just because I had been at this place the day before. There was nothing special happening. Yeah. But that's not at all depreciating your experience that you had, that it opened your mind to something that.
Yeah, I like to look at other traditions and how people have always traditionally used them, and I even use quite a bit of Buddhist philosophy to kind of go into it and to open up parts of the mind that are generally difficult to look at.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it helps me get a picture of what compassion can look like. Some of those experiences I've had and I've heard from other people, it just opens them up to breaking away from really set in stone lives and in our normal,
right.
Or at least in the U.S., the habituated patterns that people get into.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to have those experiences without the drugs?
This is my generation, psychedelics and all, and so I know a lot of people who took them a lot, and so the thing that people I know who are exploring more in a spiritual way, I would say that kind of the bottom line of people I know came down to is it can show you the keyhole, but can never open the door. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I find about it, when people take a lot of those, it's quite clear, because I know personally quite closely people, it starts affecting your brain and your ability sometimes to be able to function in a normal way. And I think I would have a lot of concern about the ability spiritually to develop if you continued with a lot of those kind of substances, because of the effect on the brain and the ability to concentrate or to think in a clear way. Because just from what I've seen from people I know that have taken a lot of hallucinogens, they haven't stayed so in contact with reality in a way that was so useful. That's what it looked like to me.
Oh, okay.
Venerable, I know that you said you were hesitant to use the word when you were talking about the mind is not matter, but you said energy. And
I said karma leaves, for lack of a better word, an energy trace. Our actions leave an energy trace. I didn't say the mind was energy.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's the notion that that energy can never be destroyed, merely transformed.
Right.
So in one case, could that
Yeah.
be consciousness?
No. The E equals MC squared, that's the transformation between material and that kind of energy. The consciousness is not that kind of energy. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I don't like to use, for karma, I don't like to say energy trace, because it gives that impression.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I don't, you say karmic seed, and people say, well, what's a karmic seed? Well, it's a potential, it's a potential that's left from an action you did that can bring a future result.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's too relevant. And my question is, does karma breed karma? And as an example, the 9/11 example that you gave of this man who didn't go to work on a particular day because he ended up doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
So he might have done some good karma that led him to take a particular action that stopped him from going to that building. In a similar way, if I do something bad in one life, does that make me do something bad in the next? Or does that anyhow affect the action that I take? Does it plan out the action that I'm going to take?
Okay. Well, one of the effects of karma is that it can set up habitual actions. Yeah. So in the case of experiencing a result like not going to the building or something, that's one type of result. But we are very much creatures of habit. And so karma just means action. Actions that we do repeatedly become easier to do. So from one lifetime to the next, some karmic tendencies to do certain actions repeatedly can go from one life to the next. So, for example, you sometimes meet little kids whose parents did not teach them, but they love animals and they always want to reach out and help animals. And you meet other little kids, again, whose parents may teach them not to harm animals, but these kids want to go kick a dog or kick a cat. Yeah, so those kinds of just habitual actions can come because of doing something similar in a previous life. It sets up a habitual energy. For example, when I was at the monastery in Nepal, there was one young monk there who had been identified as the incarnation of Lama Yeshe's teacher before. And this young monk, he was, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years old. When he was asleep, he would sometimes recite Dharma texts that he had not memorized in this life, but that he had memorized in a previous life. And so he would talk in his sleep reciting these texts. So that's an example of, some kind of karmic imprint, a habit on the mind stream that just kind of manifests in a natural way in the next life.
How can your karma be affected by appeals to a deity like Tara or using a protection mantra?
So we create karma. The seeds are on our mental continuum. When we do Dharma practice, let's say like the Tara practice, or we make requests to Tara, the way the requests are worded, it sounds like, Tara, please, give me love, open my heart to have love and compassion for all living beings. So it sounds like we're asking Tara, please open my heart so I can have love and compassion. That's what the words say. It's actually quite a psychological method because we are always projecting things outwards. Okay? So we think of Tara as this external deity. Yeah? We make requests. What we're really doing is Tara is our future potential. And by making that request, we are steering our own mind to go in that direction. Because you're not going to request Tara for something that you don't feel in your own heart is important. When you request Tara for, please inspire me to see the defects of samsara, it's because in your mind you're seeing, that seeing the defects of samsara is incredibly important. So by vocalizing that as a request to Tara, what you're actually doing is talking to yourself and saying, seeing the defects of samsara is really important. And of course, the more you put that kind of seed in your own mind, the more you're reminding yourself of that, then someday it will ripen into, it will slowly ripen actually into gradually seeing in more and more depth the defects of samsara, or the kindness of sentient beings, or whatever it is you're requesting. Okay, so it's a psychological method, actually. Yeah, it's not that Tara does the work. Yeah, Tara, please, may I generate bodhicitta? I'm going to sleep when I wake up. No, I'm saying to myself, bodhicitta is really important. Now, of course, there are beings like Tara, and they can have some influence on us, but they can't transfer their realizations into our mind. Like, I can take a tomato and put it into your plate so you can eat it. No, things are not transferred like physical objects like that. Okay, that second question.
Can you please differentiate between a cause and a condition? And can a condition also be a cause?
Yeah, conditions are also causes. Usually conditions, when we talk about causes, we're usually referring to the principal cause of something, but conditions are also causes. But when we say conditions, usually what we're referring to is, okay, of this table, the wood is the substantial cause of the table, but the person who made it is the condition that transformed the wood into the table. Okay? Or you plant a seed, the seed is the substantial cause of your daisies, yeah, but water and fertilizer and sunshine are conditions that help that seed ripen.
With a seed like that, say the Doug fir out here, and you have this tiny seed, and the seed is the substantial cause, because that's what becomes the Doug fir tree. But when you look at the Doug fir tree, the water and the nutrients made up a lot more of it physically than the seed actually did. Yeah. So at what point do these other things become substantial? I guess the last moment of the tree is the substantial cause as it grows, or what?
No, it's what is the principal cause. Yeah, so it's not what the size of something is, because the seed is small and there's much more water in the tree now. But the water, when you look at the water, you wouldn't think that this is the principal cause of a tree. You would think this is a principal cause of a lake. Yeah. But we all know that, the seed, without that seed, you're not going to get that kind of tree. Okay. So that becomes the substantial cause.